Hello and welcome to episode 95 of the Curling Legends podcast. My guest today is Ken Horton. If you're listening in your car or on your earbuds, just a reminder that you can go to thecurlingnews.com and follow along with graphics and photographs while you're listening to this episode. You can also catch some of our earlier episodes and a bunch of podcasts along with the latest curling news at thecurlingnews.com. This is part one of my conversation with Ken Horton. This is the first Scotsman that I spoke to on this series, so we had to dig into a lot of details about Scottish curling, even going beyond just Ken's own career and accomplishments. We dived into a number of areas, including some of the language used. For example, the term guttle or the term peels, and it's not related to peeling a rock. We bounced around a bit, but for the most part, cover Ken's early days, his development. Ken made it to the Junior World Championships in 1976. Those were played in Scotland, and Aviemore famously won by Paul Goswell. He was playing third for Robert Kelly that season. The following year, Ken's junior rink actually lost in the junior playdowns, but they won the Scottish Men's Championship and went to the Worlds. And certainly at the time, and maybe still are, the youngest team that had ever appeared in that event. That World Championship was won by Ragnar Kemp out of Sweden. It was actually played in Karlstad, Sweden. Canada's representative was Jim Ursel from Quebec. Jim Ursel, Art Lobel, and Don Aiken have all been guests on this show. They actually beat Scotland in the semifinal, so the young rink played quite well. And we get into the details about that junior team, a number of the other players in the Scottish area that Ken played with, competed against. So with part one, we're really here in the early days and in the 70s. And we bounce around a little bit on other topics, as we will again in part two. It's a great conversation. Really enjoyed it, and I'm sure you will as well. Here is my conversation with Ken Horton. Yeah, I was going to say, that's quite a handsome devil there. That you still got the beard, I see.
Oh, I've had the beard for 40-odd years. I shaved the beard off once when my elder children were very small, and I put them in the bath so they would know it was still me. And people walked past me. It was incredible because everyone just knows me with the beard. So I had the beard in the juniors in 76, and I've always had the beard. So I was ahead of all these curves of people having beards and things, you know.
Doesn't seem a common. If I think about all of the Scottish curlers I've seen over the years, and that's not a common trait, is it? Were you a bit unique that way?
No, I was lazy.
Yeah. Oh.
The middle. I'm the youngest of three boys, so David was with IBM in near Glasgow, and he got me a job when I was at university working night shift, and I just couldn't be bothered because I was working night shift. So I grew the beard during kind of first year at university, so it's stuck ever since.
Did you ever get one of those really, really long bushy ones though, or you generally keep it? Oh, did you? Okay.
No, there's some photographs of me. My kids think I look like Leo the Lion with the hair kind of and the beard. But of course, beard trimmers came in. So beard trimmers, you could kind of keep things slightly more under control. But there we go.
So you have the privilege and honor of being my first Scotsman. So congratulations.
Yeah. I don't know quite what to say to that, but considering, come on, the association of curling in Scotland. I mean, come on. I mean, about time, is it not?
Yeah. So let's begin. Let's go back to the beginning. So is it 400 years old or is it over 400? Like, how much of this do you want to cover? Are we just going to start when you were born and started playing? Because if you want to, maybe you could help me with some of the older history.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. We don't have to go back that far.
I mean, the bottom line is there are so many theories, but there are things that people said were curling stones dated, 1500 and something or other, and so on. I think the interesting thing, and I don't know if you want to cover it or not, but I think the interesting thing is why we've got a different system. Mm-hmm. So we used to have, or my understanding, because all the original clubs had a curling pond, the clubs tended to be quite small. So we curled in bigger ice rinks when ice rinks came along, and individual clubs paid to curl in the ice rink. So a club doesn't own an ice rink and never has done in Scotland. So there's a difference there. The ice rinks tended to be commercial operations. They tended to have a whole pile of individual clubs playing within them. And I've heard some of the people talk about didn't understand the Scottish system. The other thing was that a lot of the ice rinks, the original ones, were hockey rinks as well, and had curling and had skating at the end. Somebody talked about skating at the end. That's because it was a hockey shape. And what has happened across the years is that the original ones were big buildings with big car parking.
But in how many sheets might you have in some of these big buildings then? What would be... So these wouldn't be little 2 and 3 sheeters like in the prairies.
No.
These would be massive. Yeah, much larger.
I mean, the one I curled in Glasgow had a 7-sheet curling rink, a 4-sheet curling rink, and a hockey rink. So when it was all curling, we had 18 sheets of curling ice.
So when you, like, there's the Royal Caledonian Curling Club, but that club then, as an example, doesn't own its own rink.
No. There are clubs like the R&A in golf. No, it's the ruling body. No, it doesn't at all. No, completely different situation there. And really, as I say, I think it came about because clubs, my club, for example, is Kilmarnock and Rutherglen. So Kilmarnock had a curling pond and Rutherglen had people. So guess what? They formed a curling club. And that kind of thing happened. So they would have maybe 1 or 2 sheets of curling ice on a pond. And therefore, when curling moved indoors, there were big buildings that people curled in, and that's the difference. I mean, I've been to tiny wee ice rinks in the middle of Saskatchewan and all sorts of things that small communities have. No freezing plant. Well, I'm afraid you can't curl in Scotland without a freezing plant. That's not going to work. Or not nowadays. No.
I guess then in Scotland there was never really a natural ice surface indoors. It was from pond to indoor. Was there these big facilities? I'm assuming would all have just had ice making early on, right?
Yep. I mean, I was going to say. I mean, my club shows you about global change. My club had its 150th, and I was the president in 2004. And I look back and we had a lease on the curling pond. And it talked about curling ice bearing into the month of April in Glasgow. There's not a snowball's chance. I haven't curled outside more than 6 or 7 times in my life. And the last real big one was 1985, because the day that Billy Howard won the Scottish, and we all went up to Kirkcaldy afterwards to watch it. So global warming, global change, there you go.
While we're on that topic, because I want to ask you about the Grand Match, because there was, what year was it? There was a few years ago when we had a real deep freeze, and there was talk about bringing it back. My understanding was the insurance wouldn't support it, but I do think some people went out anyway. And of course, maybe you want to touch a little bit on the history of that. And do you remember that from a few years ago?
Yeah, we now get stuck with the old health and safety carry-on of people, and I know people tried all sorts of things. There was talk of trying to get some of the helicopters from the North Sea oil in case there was emergencies and so on. And by the time they'd faffed around forever trying to get these sort of things sorted out, it was too late. I think the last Grand Match was 79. And of course, I wasn't there because I was down south working at the time, typical. But that's the problem now when you get health and safety and all these logistical things and all the emergency services saying, what if? And people do risk assessments, then it becomes extremely difficult. And we get a short window and we lose it and it's gone.
Well, and so it may never happen again, but just for clarity's sake, so the Grand Match was, and where's it was it played again? On what body of water? So it's on the
Lake of Monteith.
Okay, and that's going, and that's one of those sort of competitions amongst clubs, or
no? It's north versus south. North of Scotland versus south.
North and south. Okay,
yep,
and
yep. Very simple. All we've done now is we've done a few indoor Grand Matches and had North against the South and all the ice rinks and so on. But it's very difficult. The laugh, of course, was for years you used to go to the Royal Club AGM and they would have a report because there was a convener for the grand match, and he would give his big report about how a draw had been done and circulated and one thing and all. The fact the thing hadn't taken place for about 15 years was totally irrelevant. But that was just the way it was. It was you had to.
I guess if you wanted to reenact the experience, you could just turn the ice plant off and then have the match, right? Like if you want to sort of reenact outdoor conditions, right? Just open all the windows, turn off the ice plant, see what happens.
Slowly turn the lights off as it gets dark, because it'll get dark at 3 o'clock with us. So that's maybe not a good idea. But although I don't know if you spotted it, there is in my little summary, there's a bit about playing during the miners' strike. Did you see that one?
Yep.
I mean, we started a game. There was a miners' strike, so electricity was being rationed. So
when would this have been? What kind of give us a timing of it?
This is the Scottish Championship second level. So there were 3 levels. There was ice rinks, south of Scotland, and then Scottish finals. This is the south of Scotland playdowns in Glasgow in Crossmyloof Ice Rink. There was a scheduled power cut, and we started the game with kind of strings of lights and a generator down the side. And I think we were about 8-0 up, and then the power came on because you knew when the power was going to come on. And I think we won by about a shot when the lights came on, but we'd done really well in the darkness. It was just bizarre, but that's exactly what happened. But we knew the power. It was all scheduled when people would have power and when people would not have power. So the game started knowing that in an hour's time the power would be on. I mean, just very odd, very odd.
So, well, let's say, so take us back to the beginning then. So you were in a curling area. You grew up where?
No.
So not really?
No, sheer luck. South side of Glasgow, I was born. And what happened was that the school that my brothers and myself went to moved. And it moved right next door to the ice rink in Glasgow, Crossmyloof Ice Rink, in the late 1950s. And basically, my brothers were there because they're a fair bit older than me. And the school played rugby in the winter. And if you didn't play rugby, you got extra classes, or there may have been some other things running or whatever. Anyway, cut a long story short, somebody said, my dad's a curler. There's an ice rink just across the road. Shouldn't the school take up curling? And the school took up curling in about the late 1950s, early 60s. And before we knew what happened, my brothers playing together won the Scottish Junior in 1964 with Bob Cowan. Mm-hmm. He was the second player in that team. And I was 7 at the time. And Prince Philip flew in his helicopter to the Royal Club AGM to present the trophies. And I kind of stood and went, wait a minute, I might quite like to have a go at this. This looks quite interesting, this game. And that's how I started.
Maybe kind of give us a background then. So you're even maybe just as you're starting. So you're 7, 8, 9. So this is, like you said, kind of late. When were you born? I'll do the math for you.
Late 1956.
Okay, that's when you were born.
Yep.
So we're talking about early 60s. So give me a context then of what, like, we know that it's a Scottish sport in terms of the legacy, the history of hundreds of years, but give us the context within that area, maybe from what you saw. Like I think about it as a kid. I'll give you an example. Like I grew up in Winnipeg. Everybody sort of, even if you didn't curl, you sort of knew about curling. It was kind of, in certain areas, it'd be a fabric of something.
Yep.
In Ontario, not so much. I had friends who grew up in Toronto, and maybe they were barely aware curling existed. Within Scotland at that time, it wasn't like golf, I imagine, right? Like there's areas within Scotland where just everyone, golf is just sort of flows through the community. Everyone, it's this very, very, it's embraced by people. Where was it still very niche, I guess?
Yeah, it was very much the kind of farming, agricultural community that was into curling. In the cities, there tended to be ladies curling in the mornings, in the afternoons, perhaps, and then maybe some business curling at night and so on. But it was very much, it was a strange thing that there's more leaning towards the farming community was very strong. I remember somebody saying when my brothers began to have some successes in the 60s, the game was coming down to the farmers and the schoolboys because they represented the schoolboys. And that was the kind of change that came about. And it was one of the nice things, I guess, at that time, because I met so many people I would never have met. There were farming community, there were all sorts of different people that I doubt very much my family had nothing to do with that area or that those kind of operations. So I've met so many people that never have met if it hadn't been for curling. And a lot of them and the younger ones that we began to curl against were from the farming community. So you had this kind of thing that people had played at school, and the Edinburgh and Glasgow schools at that time were the strong curling schools. And then eventually you got in Perth and Lockerbie and Stranraer and so on. But at that time, it was pretty much Glasgow and Edinburgh were dominant. And it was this kind of strange mixture of the farming community and the younger ones, who many of whom had started at school.
And I read that, and maybe this just comes a little bit, before you started getting established, but maybe you can provide context, that when the Richardsons went over there for that first Scotch Cup in those first couple of years, there was a very different approach to the game, even in some respects. And maybe you can confirm for me, did I understand that blanking was considered almost impolite? Was that, I don't know if that was something that I'd heard. And then that ultimately the competitive nature of the sport changed as the Scotch Cup began, that it was very recreational in Scotland at the time. And then as you say, the schoolboys and I imagine your brothers actually practice. It was probably maybe not something people did before that. I don't know. Maybe you can talk to that. Like what was the impact that early Scotch Cup had and how that shaped things?
Well, yeah, it had a big impact that all of a sudden people suddenly went, this is different. I mean, I don't think people slid much at all. The Richardsons came over, and my father had an interest in curling. He never curled, but an interest in it because he thought better for his boys to be doing something rather than hanging around street corners, I think. So he got us actively involved in the game. And my dad went and watched the Scotch Cups, and I think was just amazed. And I think it was a bit of a fire to the schoolboys. And I know one or two people, there's some stories, whether true or not, about some of the people, farmers, going and flooding their barns, teaching themselves to slide and so on, just to hang up, because they didn't want to go and I presume they didn't want to go and fall over in an ice rink in front of other people and so on. And one or two of these people were people who introduced the sliding game, in effect. But the Richardsons were complete eye-openers. And I think one of your other podcasts, somebody mentioned Willie Young playing off the crampet and so on. I watched Willie Young play off a crampet. You take the hack out and put this big metal thing down with the spikes on it, and he played off that. But he just could not compete with the Richardsons. The Richardsons were it. I guess, and they completely changed the game.
So what was the sliding technique? So when you first learned, you were sliding at that point, I imagine, right? Yeah. So now we're into the mid-60s. What was your first slider then? What was the technology?
Well,
you recall?
Here's the thing. It's odd because I was taught, you can imagine, the youngest of three boys, I was taught by my brother's friends, not my brothers, because you never pay any attention to your brothers. But when I met Graham, Adam, and most of the others I curled with, most of them were still sliding on their knees and not having sliding delivery at all. So what we got to play, we found a sticky sole. You got a pair of we called them desert boots. They're almost like a corduroy boot. They're a really soft crepe sole, which is quite sticky. So that was your sticky sole. Your slippy sole tended to be kind of a composite, but what we found was table beading. So you bought this stuff in DIY stores and you stuck it around the side of tables. And we used to travel around DIY shops, and you'd walk in and say you wanted table beading. You'd be asked what colour, don't care. Be asked all sorts of questions, don't care. It was about the thickness of it. And that's what we put on our shoes, was table beading. And it was quite advantageous because it was slightly beveled. So you slid in a small bit. So it was reasonably quick. But also, when the centre ones wore out, you just got a pair of pliers, pull the centre strip off and put one new strip in. And we slid in that for quite a long time. I think the oil crisis changed it because the table beading wasn't as thick as it should have been. So that was the start of us trying to find other bits of plastic and things to slide on. But that's what we started on, was things like table beading, yeah.
Can you confirm that that thing that I like I said, I don't know, I hear so many things that I imagined I heard. Was blanking an end? Was that considered?
I think it was just unheard of. I mean, I don't think it was.
Really?
I don't think it. I don't. I just don't think it ever came up. I mean, there were so many stones in play, and I think if it happened, it was a sheer accident. I don't think anybody. Oh yeah.
Here came the Richardsons, and they're just hitting everything and maneuvering rocks, and next thing you know, they're controlling a game, and this is a different game. And then, but I mean, very quickly, Scotland, you said, goes from moving from this sort of record. Like I think you can look at the results. I mean, the first couple Scots Cups, it was an exhibition for the most part. The Richardsons came over. I understand it was actually very social. There was but it wasn't a competition. And then it's strange, right? Almost kind of in the way, I don't know. I think, golf's probably not the same analogy. Americans sort of really embraced and got, better at golf on a larger scale than Scotland, right? Even though you've got a game and, you got a game invented in Scotland, it comes to Canada, and as it grows and thrives in its own way, and then it sort of comes back to Scotland in a different form, which is fascinating.
I think what happened very, very quickly was that some of the farming community, the Chuck Hayes, the Alec Torrances and so on, who were farming community, suddenly went, they were young at the time and looking at, this is great, this is interesting. And all of a sudden, because Alec Torrance, I think 64, did he not take Lyle Dagg to an X-Rend or something in the World Championship and the Scottish Cup? So
in 64,
all of a sudden, these guys embraced it very quickly and said, this is the future. So it changed pretty quickly from, 59, 60, 61, and all of a sudden, and then Chuck Hay wins it in 67, it changed pretty quick.
Well, tell me about Chuck. Now, when I first started this, Chuck was still around. I actually asked Bob Cowan about trying to talk to him, and Bob suggested that I think the audience would have even trouble understanding him. So his accent was extremely thick, I guess, as I understand, right? I've heard bits. But what was he like? What do you remember of Chuck?
Chuck was, first of all, Chuck was fantastic with us when we won in 77. He invited us up to Perth for a game before we went to Sweden, and he invited Bill Muirhead to play as well, and it was just to try and help us, basically. And the laugh was, of course, people heard about this, so the bar's full of people. And Chuck turned to me and he said, look, I didn't bring you here for a game. I came to help. I brought you here to help you. And he said, the first time one of your players misses a stone, shove it back down the other end and make him play it again. So that's exactly what happened, and the crowd just disappeared. And he said, right, now we can try and help you. And Chuck also came with us to Sweden, and he said, I'm involved in WCF, etc. If you need me, you find me. Mm-hmm. End of, basically. There's no such thing as coaches or fifth men or any of that kind of stuff. So, and bear in mind, we were green as anything. We just walked into this thing age 20, all of a sudden we're Scottish champions. So, and Chuck was great in many ways. We had some incidents with Chuck and Mr. Goswell in 76, and we had a few incidents here and there, but Chuck was straight.
When he first won, then, how old was he in 67 then? Like, he wasn't a young lad.
No. He'd been around curling for quite a while, but the was, I think he'd embraced the Richardsons and so on, as had Bill Muirhead, had Alec Torrance and so on. But we played both Torrance and Chuck in 73 in the Scottish finals. We beat Chuck and Alec Torrance beat us. So I just had my 16th birthday in those days.
Meanwhile, in Canada, after 58, they wouldn't let juniors play. Those rules in Scotland didn't apply. You could compete, which I think is great.
I think we just gave it such a fright all of a sudden. I mean, I fell foul of it in '76 because getting out of Glasgow was pretty tough in those days. And because I'd won the junior with Bob Kelly and I got out of Glasgow playing with Graham in the Scottish, I got a letter saying I wasn't allowed to play anymore in the Scottish because in those days, if you remember the Heck Gervais, Sure Loan, 1974, carry on, that you weren't allowed to play Junior World and World. So I got a letter from the Royal Club saying I wasn't allowed to play in the Scottish anymore because I was playing the Junior World. So that was a bit of a fell foul of that one, I'm afraid, but that's just the way it was.
So like we experience in Canada, there's always some level of administrative control within the sport that could decide on certain things. So you talked about mentorship. So back to that, when you're learning to slide, it was actually your brother's friends. Like I imagine at the school, as an example, there wasn't coaching available necessarily. There was probably just a chaperone.
It was the bigger ones taught the wee ones and so on. But I was different because I had been sliding from very young and so on. So I was slightly different from the rest just because as I said, my dad, we used to go all around Scotland watching competitions and games and things. So I kind of had an idea of what I was trying to do. But there wasn't any coaching as such.
Did your dad ever play a little bit socially, or no?
Never,
He just
never.
So all his boys took it up, and
he used to take teams all around the place, and so on. He was president of our curling club. He was honorary.
So sorry, he was
president
president of the club, but he never threw rocks.
Yep, never.
Or sorry, I got to be clear here. Am I supposed to say stones or rocks?
Well, we talk about. I mean,
we're pretty interchangeable here. Like
both.
Yeah, it's a bit of both. Okay, I was never sure if there's but guttle's a word that I've since learned recently, which I love. That's a great one.
Oh yeah, we like a good guddle.
Yeah, which is the okay. Why don't you give me the definition of a guddle? So it's properly explained.
A classic definition of a guddle is just have a look at the first few stones in a game of mixed doubles at the moment, where there's a whole pile of stones in the middle or a whole pile of stones in a particular area, and nobody's too sure what exactly is going to happen or what a heavy stone flung in amongst them might do or whatever. So a guddle is just a collection of stones, usually around the pot lid, yeah, that's basically a guddle. A lot of stones.
All right. So for someone that's not that old, the 2009 World Championship final between Murdoch and Martin in the final end, that's a guddle.
Yep. Mr. Martin, a bit of a guddle to develop. Yeah, that's it.
So Kevin got himself in a guddle, and it turned out well for Mr. Murdoch and not so well for Kevin.
Pretty much, yeah.
Now, so did you immediately fall in love with the sport? Like your brothers had some success. You mentioned kind of seeing them win. Did you just live and breathe curling, or did you have other interests, or it was...
No, everything went by the board. My dad, for a long time, was the match secretary of the curling club, so the phone would ring, people looking for substitutes and things for games, and I would just pitch up my curling kit and get games everywhere and so on. So no, there was never anything else but curling for me, really. And that's just been the way it was. I was lucky. My dad was very good at warning me of things. And he kind of warned me, bear in mind my brothers have won the Scottish Junior, which used to be 25 and under. They'd won it 3 times playing together, and David won it 5 times. And my dad was very good, saying, you're going to be compared to your brothers. So, if you're not going to be good at this game or whatever, you're going to have to enjoy it. If you are good at it, fine. But he was very good at kind of pointing out, and I just loved it, and I was going to play irrespective. It was just the way it was. And touch wood, I had a reasonable degree of success at it, so that's just the way it's panned out.
You mentioned in 1969 attending the Worlds, I guess, as a young lad. You'd have been about
12 or so,
yeah. Okay, so that was the Northcott. I think that was his last World Championships, right?
Yep. Yeah. My dad would pick me up from school and take me up to see all the evening games, and saw Northcott lose a 6 against the head to Somerville. Met Ken Watson. No, that was That was good fun.
So well, explain that. So Ken at that time, his kind of legendary status transcended the sport across oceans. Then obviously, and I think and looking back, like Ken was a big part of the Scotch Cup beginning. It actually wasn't the Dominion Curling Association in Canada; they were a little bit behind. Was he almost like an Arnold Palmer figure in the same way that the Scottish golf fans embraced Arnold? I don't know. What was sort of the Ken Watson legacy in overseas?
I think the issue was that, and bear in mind, my dad spotted him in the crowd and he was just sitting quietly and so on. I think he was one of these people who a lot of people didn't know who he was. The people who knew who he was would treat him like Arnold Palmer. So, and I think when my dad spotted him in the crowd and took me up to meet him, I think he was having a quiet chill at the back and just watching the games and so on. So I think just sheer well, the media was such, people knew of his book, didn't necessarily recognise him or would have recognised him and so on. There was not the kind of same instant recognition that there is today.
Did he give you any advice, or was there anything he said, anything you remembered?
I think keep reading the books, because we had his books and we used to pass them around and so on. And I think the only thing I remember him saying to me was to enjoy it. And I remember I met Bernie Sparks in Northcote, and I've got a programme and it's signed, and Bernie Sparks has written good curling and so on. And they were just really nice. It was really nice to meet them and to chat with them and so on. So yeah, that was again part of the spark of, well, hang on a minute, I'm getting to watch a world championship.
Your brother's age where? So where they are at? They're 5, 6, 7 years older, or what's the?
No. Bill's 13 years older than me, and Dave's 11 years older than me. Big gap.
Okay, but did you get an opportunity when you were young? Would they let you play with them once in a while? I'm assuming, and no, they wouldn't. No, never.
Never. No, my dad wouldn't let us do it. Yeah. My dad was very much, you've got to find people your own age. You've got to. They were, when I was starting out, they were the kind of tops and the juniors, and you had to kind of try and get a team and push them and so on. And it got to a stage, I think David won the Perth Masters in 74, but between work and families and one thing and another, as I was coming up and getting to the point of playing competitively, they were disappearing from it. So there's a bit of an odd handover. We played together once. The three of us played together once after my dad passed away for one competition, and that was it. We only ever played together once.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a big gap.
No, only three of us played together.
Yeah, well, not even like a fun bonspiel or something just here or there.
No, I don't. Yeah, I mean, I played some club stuff with David, but I don't remember playing much with Bill at all. Bill went to Canada for a year. He was in Sault Ste. Marie for a year in the late 60s, 66, 67 or so, and came back and got involved in Glasgow Young Curlers and started that, which was a great success. But no, we didn't really. But there was one competition when I was Scottish champion. My team had all disappeared off to play in something university thing in Sweden or whatever, so I had no team. And so we said, right, let's do it once. So we did. So that was the one and only.
Yeah, your brother coming back over. So maybe talk a little bit about that, the junior program, or what that was and what he helped sort of start.
Well, Bill came back from Sault Ste. Marie and Crossmyloof Ice Rink, the ice rink in Glasgow. Weekends, they would run some weekend competitions, but in general, go back to what I said about the women curling during the daytime and the business stuff at night. Unless it was a weekend competition, the weekend ice, we had Glasgow schools on a Saturday morning, but there wasn't anything much happened on a Sunday. So Bill managed to persuade them to give ice for virtually nothing on a Sunday afternoon. And Glasgow Young Curlers started, and all of a sudden we had a thriving club, and there's a whole pile of people. You know, the Graham Adam, Bob Kelly, all these people were all Glasgow Young Curlers. And then other young curlers clubs started elsewhere. But I think GYCC was the first. And it was really Bill coming back from Canada that was the driving force behind it.
Well, okay, so you mentioned Graham, who you've had a long history with and success with. Maybe tell me about first meeting him, how that partnership came about.
Well, well, he was 3 years older than me, and I was over at the ice rink. I would be about 11, maybe 12, perhaps. And he and his group had done quite well in the Scottish Schools Championship. And my dad had seen them and so on. I had no idea who they were. But I was on throwing stones and I had my sliding delivery, and they were, at least most of them, I think even Graham, were still sliding on their knees and pushing. Of course, I had the school uniform with me and so on. The kind of, who on earth is this? And we met that way, basically. And strangely, we were never allowed to play together at school because the master in charge of curling refused to let me play with Graham. I was to go and find people to be the ones afterwards because of the 3-year gap. So strangely, Graham would play in the schools. We played a competition in Aviemore, and Graham played the schools with one team, and then there was another competition after it, and I immediately switched to the team that included me because I was in his competitive team. But of course, it worked out because in my age group exactly were Willie Jamieson, I was at school with Willie from age 9, Keith Douglas. So we played Junior World with Bob Kelly, and then we won the Scottish in '77. So keeping us apart made me find people and so on that, say, in the longer term, it worked out. I hated it at the time because I wanted to play with Graham, but I wasn't allowed. But no, it worked out.
And something else I forgot to ask you at the start. Is there any legacy in terms of brooms? You were brought up on a push broom from the beginning, or was there some type of corn that ever existed, or it was non-existent?
There was one guy called George Lindsay, and he used a broom, very much a loner, for want of a better word. We came back from Sweden in '77 and were convinced that the brooms did better than we could with brushes, because you think back, it was people smoking in an arena, television lights weren't very sophisticated, it was very, very frosty, and the broom seemed to go through the frost better. So we actually played a competition in Inverness with brooms, which, how on earth we won, I don't know. We did win the competition, but
after never really having used them. Sorry, like you're in your 20s, never used them.
And there's the lino in the kitchen to practice, and we won the competition, but I think pretty much got the distinct impression that we were not welcome because we're spreading this horrible stuff all over the place. But we had no idea what was a good broom, what was a bad broom. It was a broom.
Okay. So explain to me what an early hair broom, like a hair broom of the '60s, is like. Is it made for curling, I imagine?
Oh, yeah.
Is it? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. A much smaller head than the 8-end or the Goswell 8-end, or much smaller headed brush. And usually we'd move to kind of soft hog's hair rather than the tougher horse hair. Because when we saw Goswell in '76, kind of, wow, this is different. He's using a brush, but it's not the kind of brush that we've got.
Okay, so it was very different. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, very different. Very different.
Now, did he also teach you guys how to corner sweep and snow plow, or was that something you guys were already doing?
The size of the heads of our brushes, we couldn't do it.
Oh, yeah.
No, I mean, the strangest thing about '76 was that we won the Scottish Junior with a set of rules that said we had to stop by the hog line. Then we went to the Junior World, and we didn't have to stop at the hog line when we were sliding. This was just totally alien to us. It was just bizarre. We just couldn't understand this.
That I find amazing. So that was a rule at one point in Canada prior to that they had brought in and then removed. How long had that rule existed for you guys? Up until that time, that had always been the rule.
My time, when my brother started, apparently they had to let the stone go while the stone was still in the colours, in the circles. They were, yeah. So that
you had to, at the top of the rink or the top of the house, if it had to be let go.
Yeah. That was the original ones.
But the slide could go past it, but you had to release it.
Yeah.
Is that it? Okay.
Exactly. I remember schools curling. We used to stand at the hog line and intimidate people who were sliding too fast. There would be people falling over and digging their fingers in trying to stop. And
because if you went over, because the idea being,
Stone's
maybe
off.
just to explain, that was a hog stone. So even though you'd release it before, if your body slid over,
Yep. If the brush went over any part of your
or
equipment,
any part of
over,
okay,
yeah, that was a foul stone.
I think back to probably 92 was an interesting year. You had Canada playing a no rock free guard zone, and the World Championships was a 4 rock free guard zone. I think that is actually probably still less of a disadvantage than like it's a completely different approach to the sport in terms of how you actually play it. I guess so your intimidation wasn't going to work with the opponents because they could just slide over. And then did that change the next year or very shortly after?
Yeah, changed it. But it was really strange because there was Goswell has some controversies, of course, being Paul, but people said it was about the sweeping and so on. But the thing I think we couldn't get over was his arm extension was such that he looked like he was fouling just about every stone, but he'd bring his hand right back in under his body and his arm would be, he'd touch the ice before the hog and say, well, I can't be fouling. We go, So but we'd never seen this before because we'd always had to stop. It was really quite odd.
Paul Goswell played in one Brier, lost in the semifinal. He is still number one on my podcast. Yep. You name it. Maybe the first episode with Pat Ryan has more, but only because it was the first. Bizarre, right? When you think about it, it's almost like here's someone who never actually played in a world championship outside of juniors. Just his personality, everything about him just extends beyond that, I think, in the sport, which is, I think, maybe unheard of. Like, I can't think of another sport where you've got someone who really left the limelight very early from a global or a national stage, and yet still remains to, I'm 50 years. We're talking, it's coming up on 50 years since almost your juniors. So what was that?
Yep.
What was your impression of Paul then?
Our first meeting was a bit strange because, of course, it was in Aviemore, so we were the host nation. So we are neatly kitted out in our blazers and ties and one thing or other to meet all of it. And Paul kind of wanders in looking at he's slept in the plane or something. I don't know quite. It wasn't terribly gracious when we met him the first, but made it perfectly plain he'd come for one reason, that was to beat the Swedes, because the Swedes had the audacity to go to Canada and win the first junior world, and that's all he was interested in. Strangely, we beat Paul. We lost the first game to Norway, we lost our second game to the Swedes, and then we beat Paul. So we did a little kind of, I wouldn't say we complained, but we suggested that maybe they should have a wee look at his hog line and a few other things, and there was a few comments made here and there, but no, he was an amazing curler. He put me right in a mess in a commentary in a competition he came over to play in Edinburgh many years later. And every time he got down, he would hit. And every time he got up, he would draw. And of course, I was doing allegedly expert summaries at the end of every end saying, now he's got up, he's bound to hit. No, he would draw. And he came to me afterwards and said, I make you look a complete and utter idiot in that. So Paul and I, we had a bit of a banter eventually, but it was quite abrasive when we met him the first time, shall we say, but it was very focused. He would come to beat the Swedes, and that's what it was all about.
Well, and it's interesting that you guys had success in that game against him because you weren't using corn. I do feel like, and Paul talked to this and the whole team, that they sort of had an advantage over the team that was used to corn as a technology, because, or as a sweeping form, because they could manipulate it. And against you guys, well, they weren't going to have that advantage of being able to manage it, and you guys knew what you were doing. Let's go back then. So you didn't you skip in as a junior, but you were you always sort of comfortable back end then, or how did that evolve for you? In a lot of cases, skipping is a very specific sort of mindset, right? Making the last shot, wanting that. But how did that sort of begin for you? And then what was your...
Graham and I always played skip and third. Graham has always skipped. Mm-hmm. Graham's always skipped. Skipped at school, skipped all the way through, etc. And I always played third. And what happened really was, because of that age differential, we should probably have won the junior in 75. We're a really powerful team. Bob Kelly was leading, and with Graham and myself, we had a really powerful team. We lost one game, and that was us gone in 75.
So that was that team that made it in 76, the same team? Same
No,
junior
no, no,
team?
no,
Or
no, no,
oh,
because Graham was too old. That was Graham's last year.
I see. Okay.
So Bob Kelly came in and skipped.
So Bob came and skipped the team that
Bob
Graham
Kelly came.
left.
But then, sorry, I was going to say, and then the next year I was still a junior, but because I'd been told I couldn't play with Graham in '76, I kind of reluctantly became the skip because I was still 2 years of junior life. That's how I ended up skipping, because I still had years.
And what was the junior age again?
21. They come down to 21. We'd standardized, because originally when my brothers were winning, it was 25 and under.
Yeah, well, I was kind of trying to figure that out because there was I guess from 71 to 74, there was sort of an unofficial World Juniors. It's not really, maybe now, so Scotland didn't compete in that? Or you did? Or how was that? Okay, so but your brothers never did they play in any of those?
No, that was a kind of a strange thing. That was the forerunner to the junior world was, for want of a better phrase, a kind of a casual arrangement. And Bob Kelly's brother, David, played, and a few of it tended to be a group of people who, for wherever they were at university or whatever, had the time to go. And it was East York and Toronto, I think it was. Anyway, but it was a kind of an informal thing. And then it became the junior world in 75.
Yeah, all 4 years, 71 to 74, it was played in East York, Toronto area. And
I think you'd find there was a Scottish team in it every year, but it would tend to be not a team that played together all the time. It'd be four guys who were able to go and so on. And so it was informal.
It wasn't like in 75, 76 where there was a structured play down to win.
No.
So, but there was a Scottish Junior Championship prior to that. Just that team didn't necessarily go to it, and how it all began.
I don't know if it was a matter of timing. I can't think. It may just have been a matter of timing and whether we changed the Scottish Junior when the Junior World came along to make sure we had time to get a winner to then go to the Junior World. I have a feeling that the juniors used to be a tail end of the season, and they moved it all because of the official Junior World starting in 75.
So curling did become recognized as a school sport. So maybe explain what a school sport means. And
sure,
the colors, was that, because that had a specific importance, or that was...
Well, what happened in secondary school, so from age kind of 14 upwards, there was an official sports day, and school would end early and there would be official sports. So in the summer months in my school, it was cricket and athletics. In the winter months, it was rugby and maybe cross-country running and so on. But there were other sports. So there was rowing and other things. So what tended to happen was, if there was a teacher who was interested enough in a sport and it was then supported by the school, then it was a school sport. So basically, from my brother's era, the guy who'd been involved then was still involved in my era. And we ended up in a situation where the school's right opposite the ice rink. We ended up, when I was leaving school, we had 100 boys go across every Wednesday afternoon to curl. And one of the things about being a recognised school sport, if you achieved certain things, you got colours on your blazer and you got various things. So I had colours on my blazer from the last 4 years at school, because I'd won a whole pile of things by that point. My brothers, at their time, I don't think it was actually recognised officially because it was in its infancy. But the school won the first ever Scottish Schools Championship in 1967, which is after my brothers and before me, but it was an official school sport.
Now, has all that kind of gone by the wayside since, or what? Because I know in Canada, the beginning, we're talking about the World Juniors, but the early junior development in Canada was called the Schoolboys. In fact, that first team with Goswell, they were all at the same high school, which, then the next year they changed that ruling. So what's it like now, or did that evolve or kind of fall out of favor from a school sport?
No, there's still a national schools championship. What's tended to happen, and I kind of repeat, it's to do with having a teacher who's interested enough. So what we've tended to find now is that places, the Lockerbie, Stranraer, and so on, some of the smaller places, the larger cities, Glasgow, Edinburgh, not so much Aberdeen. I think Aberdeen's got some, unless there's somebody who's interested in doing it in the school from an official capacity, then it tends not to be. So
it's not set in a curriculum or anything, or in a guidelines based on sort of the regional scholastic structure of it. No, okay, yeah, it's just somebody's got to take the reins and make it happen.
Yeah.
You could have an entire high school and have no curling whatsoever because there wasn't any requirement for it to exist.
You kind of need a driver somewhere, and usually it needs to be a member of staff. Particularly nowadays, the usual carry on about, you can't leave children at an ice rink, you've got to make sure they get home, and all these things. All of the schools held responsible for so many different things nowadays. It's difficult unless somebody's really enthusiastic to A, get it going, and B, keep it going.
Yeah, unlike the 60s and 70s where everyone just, it was a free-for-all, and
it's a bit more laissez-faire. It just happened.
We just let kids run around and get into trouble and all the good days.
Yeah.
So speaking of getting into trouble, okay, so you mentioned this one at 14. So you're 14 years old. So this is with Graham playing, and this was the RCC Rink Championship. So maybe explain what that was. And so you have hit puberty, I'm assuming at this time, but it's just barely, right? So, and you're playing against all these old timers. So take me through what you remember about that.
Well, what happened was the Glasgow Schools Curling Club. We used to curl on a Saturday morning, and we joined the Royal Caledonian Curling Club to have some official recognition and so on. And the Royal Club Rink Championship is open to every club in Scotland. So every single club in Scotland can put a team in. There are local playdowns. So we, trying to play some competitive curling and so on, we entered in Glasgow and played people who just couldn't understand what are these boys doing here. And we won, of course, from Glasgow. The national finals were in Karlstad, and over a couple of days, and we played one particular team, Tom McGregor. Tom McGregor went on to play with Alec Torrance, and they were, I think they'd been second or third in the Scottish about 3 years prior. And we ended up playing them in the final, and we won this thing. And our total age, so the four of us, total age is about 61 or 62. And because Graham's 3 years older than me and the others were kind of in between us. And it was just totally unheard of. It was in all the newspapers and so on. These kids have appeared and we've won this national championship and so on. The big trophy was taken into school and put in front, because we're all Hutchie, all the same school. The rector had to announce we'd won a national championship and so on. And all the rugby boys going, what? How does that happen? But that's what happened. And we won this thing. And the laugh, of course, was that Graham and I won it 38 years later at Skippenthurst.
Together. And was there any animosity then, or like how were juniors? I mean, young boys as you were you embraced a bit with some of the men's teams, or was it a mix? Did it depend a little bit on who you were playing?
No, I think in general people are quite intrigued to see us appear and so on, and
but even the competition, because I mean, I'm saying sometimes the older fellows don't like so much when the young whippersnappers come and beat them.
Well, I think the difficult thing for us was a lot of the guys who didn't look as if they could throw a stone straight could, and had been doing it for many years. And it was one of the great lessons for us was, we had to learn how to beat these guys, because these guys would, put freezes on all the time and they would do all sorts of things. And the fact we could throw them faster and more accurate didn't actually do anything if they kept freezing and everything. So it was a really good time for us because there was no real norm. We just went out, we played against all sorts of people. And in general, we met so many lovely people who were accepting of us coming in, and some of them thinking, here's the future of the game, perhaps. Go back to the Richardsons. Some of them had seen the Richardsons and thought, oh, wait a minute, these guys are trying to pick up a game that is perhaps the future of the game.
Now, there were strict rules, I'm assuming, though, like after a game and then you're sitting with your opponents, would they have to buy you a I don't know, a Coca-Cola, or what was the requirement?
Yeah.
Because you're 14 at the time.
Well, we couldn't buy them a drink, but
You can,
invariably my dad was there, so my dad would have to sort things out for us if they needed to buy the opposition a drink. But
well, I was going to say, does the winning team buy a drink? Is it very similar to the Eastern Canada tradition?
I was teetotal for 6 years because so many of my friends got in trouble driving cars and so on. No, the winners bought a drink, then the losers bought a drink. So it was, it was, and very much that was the norm and the way it was and so on. And that was during competitions and so on. Yeah, that was the way it was.
I guess it's fair to say then, similar to Canada, there's a very social aspect. And even as the sport became more competitive, the social aspect of it didn't really dissipate too much.
No.
I mean, we can get into where we're at now with Olympics and all of the training. But I mean, a lot of sports were certainly more that way going back in that era. But in particular, curling grew out of a gentleman's sport, of friendliness. But let me hit on it here now, though, because I've always loved, particularly with the history in that era, the 60s, 70s. Yeah, you shake hands off the ice, but on the ice, you're trying to beat those other guys. Like you mentioned that there's gamesmanship would take place. You're not that friendly on the ice, I guess. Is that fair to say? You adhere to the rules of the game, but you're trying to win.
Yes. But I like to think we acknowledge good shots from the opposition both ways. So yeah, there's a balance. My curling club, when talking to people maybe joining, I like to say it's friendly and competitive. So and the competitive stuff was competitive but still friendly, if I could put it that way. So I mean, we tended not to mix. You tended to get some groups. So the Edinburgh group and the Glasgow group and so on wouldn't necessarily meet other than after a game or whatever. But we kind of, particularly in the early days, we were breaking down perhaps some barriers that had been there for a long time. We had a spell, 77 I won, 78 Graham should have won, 79 I played Graham in the semis of the Scottish. 2 years later, Colin Hamilton from Edinburgh, I think, won 2 years in the spin. So the youngsters were coming through quite quickly at that point.
Kind of like now, a little bit, with all this...
It's a wee bit different. We were at university, and Graham's a doctor, I'm a chartered accountant, and so on. It's a wee bit different.
Take me through that. Like, you saw your brothers step a bit away from the competitive side. Did you, as you're having that early success, and I want to jump into that sort of first junior success, but were you just kind of in the moment and not really worried about 10 years later? Let's just I want to be competitive. Or did you see there's a 20 or 30 year kind of existence in this sport where you didn't think that far ahead necessarily?
I was very lucky because I was able to do some juggling. I got a university exam changed.
Really?
When I won it, yeah. When I won in 77, yeah. And so I was meant to set a university exam in the afternoon of the Fridays. The Scottish started on the Friday, and I was meant to set an exam on the Friday afternoon. And I was allowed to go and sit the exam in the morning, first thing. The lecturer came with me and saw me get in my car and drive to Perth, and I wasn't allowed to speak to anybody. And he was quite worried that the professor at university was going to find out and there's going to be some trouble. Of course, we had a stop press after we won the Scottish. And on the Monday, the professor came in and said he wanted to speak to me. And I thought, oh, crikey. And it was to congratulate me. So I did a lot of juggling. When I did my CA training, I'd accepted to go and work for one of the big international boys. And we got the Worlds and Europeans in those days. So I was going to start with them in September, needed a week off to go to the Europeans in October, November. And they were accommodating as well. So I've been extremely lucky. We weren't so lucky with Graham because Graham's a doctor. So sometimes we had junior ward rounds and things that he couldn't get out of. And we ended up in the old days. I know you had the problem in Canada as well of having to get somebody from your local club or your local rink to play. And we had a few of those issues. But generally, we just were lucky and we managed to juggle and make it work. But yeah, there was a few.
So there's at least an appreciation within the community of, okay, this is important, and even though you're our employee, we're going to allow this because it's got that sort of level of importance. Like, it's interesting, like in some of my recent conversations with some of the few of the American guys that from the Wisconsin area, that like a little more blue collar, like they missed events, missed world championships because they had to work. Right? like you just had to, and it's like, I'm going to lose my job, so I guess I can't go. And a couple instances, like I know Ron Braunstein missed in 65 because he had exams, so he couldn't get his exams moved. So it was a balance, but you could still be a world champion and have a real career. You could pursue it, but it was a balance. So 74 when you skip, that's when you can't play with Graham because he's too old.
Yeah.
Is that your first full year skipping, or you had skipped here and there, or was?
Yeah, no. Bob Kelly skipped to juniors in 76, and then the next year I've got 2 years left in juniors. As have Willie.
I was saying
Willie,
in 74. No, I was saying in 74 you said you skipped to the Scottish Schools Championship.
Oh yeah. That was just school stuff.
Oh, but that's the schools. Oh, okay, so that's kind of like the school boy, like we talked about. Okay, but you were mentioning at the ice. So the ice.
Oh yeah, this is the old.
Like I've always heard about it being faster, going away from the glass or towards the glass. It was faster from the left side of the sheet to the right side, or what was the?
Oh, this was we could only play one handle because the other handle would just swing off the sheet. But no, the laugh was that Willie and Keith were playing front end for me, and I was talking to my third, and they put a stone at the side of the hack, and I came down to play my shot, and a stationary stone had run away and hit the barrier. The ice was so uneven. I mean, it was just unbelievable, and it was just crazy. I mean, honestly, but we played in some awful ice. I think when we went to Kelso in the Royal Club Rink Championship, I think it took us about 2 games probably to work out that both handles could curl, because a lot of the ice we saw was just one handle, basically. I mean, it was just horrendous stuff. Awful.
But that was your first sort of full skipping experience for the most part in 74 with that. Yeah, I know it's only schoolboy, like the school.
Yeah. But I mean, it was only a few games. It wasn't much, but.
Back to my thoughts on it, like you might, and I know you've listened to a few of these. So take Paul Savage. Paul found he skipped a lot as a youngster because he was the best player, and so he just sort of led to skipping. But he probably found out over his career he probably enjoyed third way more, and thrived at that position more. So, what was it in your case then? Did you have a preference, I guess, in terms of?
I think there was 2 things. I think I felt more involved because I was passing information to and from front end to skip the whole time. And I think I also kind of felt that my job at third was making the skip's job easy. Therefore, I was liable to get the interesting shots or the dig us out of this hole because we're in a terrible mess here or whatever. So I just found third more stimulating is the wrong word, but I just found it more interesting, I think, than skipping. And I just kind of took to it, and that was it. And, really, when I ended up skipping late in 77, 76, 77, it was purely because of age, because Graham was too old for the juniors and Bob Kelly was too old by that point as well. And I had the most experience, therefore I would skip, and that was it. And then...
Yeah, so you didn't mind throwing the last rock. You just got a bit lonely at the other end.
No,
yeah.
No. I got cold standing around, whereas I'd been sweeping. That was the biggest issue. Was that I just felt a wee bit more detached from it, I guess. Whereas the third, you felt involved in everything.
What was interesting, I guess, about Goswell's team, right? They had won in 75. So, and at the stage where they come to the Worlds, then
Swedes won.
No, I'm saying that they won the Canadian in 75 because the Canadians would send, which we started doing again recently. But so at the time he wins the Canadians, they're just a young team from this high school. And then by the time they come to the Worlds, they've won cars. They've been beating, they've been traveling across Western Canada and winning cash against all these other players. So it was an interesting dynamic. And then just anything else from that you want to talk about with that? Well, first, maybe tell me how you get there. That was your first world experience in getting to that. What was was there any kind of close calls or things you remember about that season then? And what was?
Oh, yeah. But we didn't play together as a team that season, really, other than in the juniors, because I was still playing with Graham and the competitive stuff. But no, we had a particular game where there was the verging on impossible shot that had to be played, and I think we're getting the umpire upset. We're taking so long about this shot, and Bob Kelly and I changed our minds about 4 times, but lo and behold, he went down and played it, and it completely changed the whole thing. So yeah, it was originally it was pretty much straight knockout for us. So you had to win games. We curled a lot, but not as a team. But then we won, and then we went to Aviemore. But Bob Kelly had been around for a reasonable number of years. He'd played third for my brother David for a while, and so we're a reasonably experienced team. But we hadn't played a huge number of games together as a team.
Okay, so Bob's a bit older than you, and Bob's still around?
Yes, I played. Well, his yes, he now lives in Portugal. His grandson and my grandson were both playing in a Christmas bonspiel, so we turned up and we were both playing. Bob hadn't been in the ice for about 10 years, so in the first end of the bonspiel, we ended up playing opposite each other. So that was quite a hoot after 40-something years. So that was a bit of a... So, no, I saw him very recently.
And then take me through, so you winning the Scottish Juniors to the Worlds, what's the gap? How much time have you got between?
Not a huge amount. I think we probably had about 4 weeks, maybe more than we had in the Worlds, but about 4 weeks I think we probably had. But it was fairly kind of organised.
Well, also it's the first time Scotland's going to host it, which is kind of...
I think just go back. I think the other thing we didn't realise was, we'd seen Aviemore Ice Rink, though. How was going to look for a World Championship? Was it going to change? I mean, no idea.
But you knew that season that this was happening, right? Like, this was a goal of the team?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you knew that. Okay.
Well, we were so disappointed having lost in 75 because we thought we had a really, really good team in 75. We did have a really good team in 75, but it didn't work out. The junior wasn't terribly kind because, as you probably see, in the next 2 years, lose one game and that was you gone. So,
well, anything else from 76, that experience then? The home crowd fans, what were things like? Anything you kind of, when you think back?
I remember a few people after they lost the first couple of games. I remember a few people saying, listen, doesn't matter if they've got maple leaves in their back or what they've got in their back. There's 4 people out there you need to beat. And, there was a bit of that. It was just so different.
Do you guys think those first few games, was it a bit just overwhelming, do you think?
I think it was just so different. And I think I think it's an odd experience to kind of be thrust into. You've played club curling and one thing, and all of a sudden somebody sticks Scotland in your back or whatever, and I don't think it's any different for any other country. I don't think we were anything special in that regard, but I think the Swedes were very well prepared. They'd won in 75, and I think they were a bit different. I think the Norwegians and ourselves were pretty similar. Goswell was fired up, of course. You knew he would be, but as you've just said, he'd played so much by that point.
And as a team, right? And you mentioning about sort of the communication with each other and how they were built. Just any other thoughts that you have from that event? Just, I mean, it's early days, right? Like you say, of a world championship for a junior experience. Like, was there good crowds? Was it like it was held where? So it was in
Aviemore, in the centre in Aviemore. No, it was a normal curling rink. There weren't tremendous crowds. I think we got some pretty decent crowds when we got through to the semis. And I think the fact that we'd beaten Goswell in the round robin brought people thinking, oh, here we go, there was a chance here. And I think the word had begun to spread that you have to see these Canadians. They've got big-headed brushes and they do strange things, And I think that the legend of Goswell had kind of permeated a wee bit through the Scottish curling community by that point. I think people were curious to come and see him.
Well, yeah, because he was also a bit animated, and he also had a bit of he had good vocal cords, I guess, when he was yelling at his team.
Yeah, and he had that kind of strange, he almost had that kind of druid look of the long hair and the beard and one thing and another. So, he was certainly something a bit different for the Scottish curling fan to look at. But boy, it was some cup.
So what was the we're talking about a bunch of young men all gathering together in this competition. Was there any sort of socializing within an event like that, or was it very cutthroat? Like you mentioned about, would you sit and have even a non-alcoholic drink after a game and chit chat, or was that sort of not happening at that event?
It kind of depended who you're playing against. The other thing was that the teams in that era were staying with local people. So we weren't on hotels or any of these sort of things. So so it depended kind of on what your hosts had planned for you or whatever. So it was a kind of a strange situation. I was going to tell you about how I found out about morning class. David Duncan was the president of the Royal Club, and he had a room or a suite, I think, in the local hotel. And he said, if you're ever tired, or you want to go. So we went there and we walked into this room.
But this is at the juniors. So they did this at the World Juniors. Okay. So morning classes, as I'm familiar with them, a prior tradition going back after the Second World War.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay. So they would do it at the World Championships. And so what was involved then?
Well, so we had no idea what was happening. So, and we walked into David Duncan's room and there's a smell of lemons. And we're going, what on earth's going on here? So, of course, we open a cupboard and all these lemons come flying out everywhere. We've got the room full of them. This is where he was having morning class, which we had no idea what it was, with no inclination, not a clue what was happening. But we're trying to put this room back together before anybody else found out. But that was... So we started asking questions, and that's when we found out what morning class was. So morning class is spread across all the major events, I guess.
So you didn't partake in any of the special gin drinks of any kind. You guys were focused on your games that day, I assume.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and as you say, you personally were.
No, I was teetotal,
abstaining until your mid-20s.
Yeah.
Well, with any of your teams, then, since it was your team, I mean, that was your approach to alcohol. But was that? How did you ever have any, I guess, teammates that you had to reel in or bail out of jail or anything like that?
Yeah, but guess what? I was the driver because I was the guy who's teetotal. So I'm the guy. Let's play for Ken. I was very popular. I was very popular with my now wife's parents because they knew I didn't drink when I was driving, or didn't drink at all. I was very popular with other teams. Well, Ken will drive, so that's good. So I was quite popular for a few years.
And you might make all your shots in the morning game while the rest of the team gets
maybe
it gets their skills back. So in that junior, you mentioned, so the rest, you got Willie Jamieson, who I guess you played with for a number of years as well, right?
Yeah.
Keith Douglas. So you guys were all from the same. Were you from not necessarily the same high school though? Were you, or the same schools?
Yeah. No. We were classmates. Three of us were classmates.
You're all classmates. Okay. Yeah. Okay. The term peeled. Okay. You use this term peeled. Explain this to me then. So peeled, unlike what we're thinking about, which is peeling a lemon or peeling a rock. A peeled is a tie game then. Is that
right? A tie game. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there were well, explain that then. Were there events though that had extra ends or some way to determine winners, or this was always sort of the tradition?
Depended. There was a famous year, 1973. We deemed the year of the peel. We played in the south of Scotland Scottish Championship playdown. So we played out of Glasgow, then we went to south of Scotland, then there was finals after that. And Alec Torrance played 6 games, won 2 of them and peeled 4 of them. So he was never beaten, but he tied 4 games out of 6.
Okay.
And then in the Scottish finals that year, there was a playoff on 3 wins and 1 peel, so 7 points between Sanderson and Torrance. And we had 6 points. So we were only in 73, we were 1 point away from being involved in a playoff for the Scottish title in 73.
For the Scottish men's title, so to be Scottish men's title, and you're 13?
No. I just had 16.
You're okay. Okay, either way. So you're 10 pounds more, maybe 8.
Yeah, I just turned 16.
Wow. And but okay, so it was sort of a round robin structure, and you would get points. You're playing, and then
so that was the year of the.
So what would be a strategy then around? I guess if you're playing as an example, you're later in the event, you might even play for a peel.
Oh yeah,
or something of that nature, right? Like okay, Change your strategy, yeah.
Yeah, it began to change, and the appeals, because of the complications that it caused, they began to get phased out. But we played extra ends and so on. But yeah, it was the 73 was just crazy. There were so many appeals, it was incredible.
And I apologize for this because this, and if by the way, if you've got to go and we got to do a second part, we can always do that.
No.
Unfortunately, because you're the first Scottish person I've had, there's a lot of stuff we got to cover.
Yeah.
So as an example, any idea the origin of this term then? Okay, so in a soccer match or football match, my apologies, in a football match and it's tied, we don't say it's peeled. Like that term isn't used in that sport.
I honestly don't know the derivation of it. I honestly don't know. No. But we always talk about peels and games being peeled, and yeah. No.
As somebody who, tries to study the sport, I mean, to me, the language of it, and it really irks me actually when they try to pull it out. Like, why can't we use the term bonspiel more? I feel like think about in golf now, like even the Royal and Ancient has pulled the term all square. Why? I love that term. When something has its own language, it's actually more fascinating and intriguing. Think about curling. You can have a draw, which is a draw to the button. You can have a draw, which is a bunch of teams playing against each other. You can have a rink, which is what you go into to curl. You can have the rink, which is your team that goes to play the game.
Yeah.
To me, that's part of the appeal, is this, you're in this own little special language. I mean, that kind of irks me at times. I feel like we got to keep some of that. So if anyone out there hears this and understands what the term peeled, because I'd never heard it before as it related to a tied game. I guess it's not used anymore because there probably are no tied games. That's probably gone by the wayside. Or is there still any?
We would still use it in a club game. In a club game. Yeah, in a club game, we'd still talk about.
Especially if you're out there for a social night out and you've already been out there for a couple hours and you want to go up and have a pint. You know what? Let's shake hands. Let's just, we don't have to play a whole other end.
Field game. Off we go. Yeah.
Off we go.
No problem.
Makes good sense. When I've talked to a lot of people about sort of, there's the junior, you're in juniors, and then you're in men's, and it's sort of these two separate. It sounds like it's very fluid in your case. You're playing a junior event, you're playing a men's event, you're playing with this team, you're playing with that team. That's very much how your seasons would evolve as you're moving into this kind of next phase.
Yeah. The complication was when I was banned from playing in the Scottish in 76. That was the complication. And that's why Graham and I just agreed there's no point in us playing together because we think we've got.
So it's not, you could have played. I mean, you had the schedule allowed it. They just said because you're the junior team and because you're, but meanwhile, you were playing with Graham that season on a men's team.
Yeah. And all the bonspiels and everything. Yeah.
So in a way, it kind of even split up your partnership for a little while.
Well, it did. No, I categorically did. But it was the strangest thing because we lost the junior in one game. I think it was at 12th end in a measure or something in 77, season 76, 77. Said, well, we may as well just play in the Scottish for practice and so on. And of course, Graham had picked up Bob Kelly.
So this is you with your junior team. So the whole team. Yeah. It's not a blended team, if you will.
We're all 19 or 20. We were all 19 or 20. So Graham's picked up Bob Kelly, and he's got a really good team. We beat them in Glasgow, and then we went to the Southwest District, and we won again. We went to the national finals, and we ended up in a 3-way playoff. And the other team, so it's Graham, myself, and another team from David Robertson from Dundee, and they wanted to come back the next day. And we said, we can't. We've got university. We can't come back. So we went down this.
So what time of day is this at that this conversation is taking place?
About 5 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. So we went down a hallway in the ice rink, and I pulled the short straw, so I got the buy into the final. So the other two played a semi, and my team, we all went different places. We all just said, right, meet in the car park at 9 o'clock. We're playing at 9:30 for the Scottish title.
You didn't want to stay watch the game.
No,
You're like,
no.
Yeah.
No. So we met up in the car park, and everyone's going, wow, what a game that was. We're going, well, we won. Who did we play? And there's 2 photographs taken before the final. Both teams with the trophy because the photographer couldn't stay. And we ended up,
And the final was who? So who was in the? It wasn't Graham in the
David
final.
Robertson.
Okay.
David Robertson. We were 2 down playing the 8th, got a 2, and then I played 2 hits and rolls in behind cover at the 9th, and we stole another 2 and spent the whole end. My team were hitting really well, and spent the whole end going, "You can have a hit to win the Scottish title." And David Robertson put his first stone through the bag, so I didn't have to throw my last one. It's bizarre.
When you're in that 3-team playoff, you guys probably have no expectations then, right? You're probably thinking, no one's expecting us. Like, did you think you could win the Scottish title with your junior team at that age, and you a young skip against, these guys you've played with who had skipped you? And I guess, when did it enter your mind you could win? Was it on that last shot or was it a little bit earlier?
It entered my mind we could win when we started the 10th end and we were then 2 up. My team kept saying, if we do everything right, you're going to have a hit to win the Scottish title. And I panic stricken. But my first stone was just a hit, and there was nothing in play, and they drew and I hit it. But the guy's going, you can have a win. And then, of course, I begin to get wound up, and I didn't have to play it.
Did Graham, Bob, and the boys kind of stick around for you, or did they take off? Or
they were there.
Like, as disappointed as they might have been, were they happy for you? I imagine.
Oh, indeed. I mean, Graham and I have known each other forever, so yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So,
do you think that game would have been harder if you'd have played against?
Well, the issue I would have had was we'd been fortunate enough, and a lot of it's down to Willie Jamieson, I have to say, because Willie's hitting was just tremendous. We'd beaten him in Glasgow, we'd beat him in Hamilton in the district, we'd beat him in Perth in the finals. The laws of average said there was one coming the other way pretty quickly towards us. So I think I was probably got off the hook slightly there by not having to play Graham.
Were you the youngest team then at the time, I imagine, right, that had gone to a Worlds from Scotland? I would think.
By miles.
So take me through that. So you're going to a men's Worlds, Air Canada Silver Broom, not the Scotch Cup anymore. This is now, it's much more established. So what does Scottish curling do with you? What do you remember in terms of the lead up and what's involved? Like, maybe kind of take me through some of the mechanics of that.
It was when realization began to sink in. I had no passport. I'd never been in an aeroplane in my life. We got told by the Royal Club to go into this very fancy tailors in Glasgow and tell them we were the Scottish curling champions and we needed blazers and things. And of course, these guys are looking at us as if we've got 3 heads. It was really quite bizarre. We had this game with Chuck in Perth, and Chuck tried to tell us what was going to happen to us and one thing or another, but it was just, it was only about 3 weeks, I think. It was just a complete whirlwind of trying to even get university sorted out so that we weren't endangering too much. All 4 of us, all at Glasgow University at the time. So, it was pretty harum-scarum, and it was never a dull moment for a few weeks.
But it just reminded me of something you wrote I wanted to remind you of. Take me back to, though, you actually explain this. Did you win the Scotch Cup because it was then later used for a different... this is a great story. Explain this, yeah.
Well, the Scotch Cup, when Air Canada Silver Broom came along, the Scotch Cup was given by the Scotch Whisky Association to the Royal Club. And basically, you got the Scotch Cup when you won the Scottish.
Okay.
So there was another trophy as well. So there's a sponsor's trophy as well, but you got the Scotch Cup. So as the winners of the Scottish men's, you got the Scotch Cup and you get your name on the Scotch Cup in amongst Ernie Richardson and all this stuff. So we left Perth about 2 a.m, I think, to drive home. And my then girlfriend, fiancée, now wife of 40-odd years, myself, driving home. And we stopped under a lamppost and opened the boot of the car, and here's the Scotch Cup. And you kind of pick it out and you go to Ernie Richardson and all these people's names on it, Somerville, and just kind of pinched each other. It's just unbelievable. I mean, it was just an incredible moment. You just think, gosh, this is, what have we done? It's just absolutely crazy.
At some point, did you think, don't lose it? Like, I'm just...
absolutely.
This isn't a replica. This is the actual trophy, right? Yeah. It's in your possession.
When I finally got to my bed that night, it was beside me. And, it was on the floor. I mean, I was just mind-blowing.
Because, I mean, I've heard stories of the claret jug actually going missing. You've probably heard some of those as well, right? Yeah. Like, the Open champion would actually get the actual trophy, and it might go missing, which I always think's amazing. So where's the Scotch Cup now? Is that still how they use it if you win the?
As far as I'm aware, we had an exhibition and it was Hampden Stadium, and I went along and I took one of my grandsons and was able to show him, there's my name on the Scotch Cup, so yeah, still being used.
I think it's so fascinating. One of the things I still find so surreal about curling as an example in Canada from a Brier, the history of this national championship, and some of our greatest never actually won the McDonald Brier Trophy, which we had for the first 50 odd years, and then since 2000, you get this 20-year period of this big tankard, the big mug from Labatt's because it's a beer company, and it's so strange. I mean, and it's a neat trophy in its own right, but it's not the legacy of this trophy from years before. So I did not know that about the Scotch Cup. So that's kind of it's wild. And
something.
So you're young and you're playing. So you're going to Karlstad, Sweden. You had not left the had you left Scotland at that point, or you had? Oh, hello.
Hi.
It's 6 o'clock. So that's a glass of wine just arrived, Kevin.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, it's only 11 here, so I'd have to have Baileys and coffee. That would be my. I guess I'm kind of going to have a.
You could play that song. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, but anyway.
It is. Yeah.
Sorry, you were saying.
My thought was, where had you been at that? Other than traveling for curling, I guess mostly around
England and Wales. My grandfather worked in the railways, so my father had moved. He was born in England, educated in Wales, and lived most of his life in Scotland. So I'd visited places. I'd never been out of the UK. Never.
Oh, okay.
Never even been to Ireland. I'd never been. So no. And all of a sudden, here we go. What we're going to do? This is chaos.
So you hadn't been out of country. You got to get a passport. I'm assuming they all got worked out. I mean, had a good result at that Worlds, but what were your expectations going in? I guess was it similar to that men's where we're enjoying the ride, or how did you guys approach it?
We were worried, obviously, because we thought, crikey, my dad was very good again, because my dad said to me, if you have a disaster, blame the system, because under the system you won fair and square. So we kind of grasped hold of that a wee bitty.
Don't get away from the fact you earned it. This is the way, like you beat these teams.
Absolutely.
Helping you understand that you're good enough.
Yeah,
really.
Absolutely. Because we were kind of, hang on a minute. If we walked into something we shouldn't have, walked into, and it was very odd.
But you had the international experience having played in the junior worlds, at least like the year before. So there was at least, you'd seen Sweden, you'd seen Norway, like you'd seen the colors. I guess you've been at some, but was it a very different, like maybe take us between the difference then in terms of the way the events felt?
Well, all the obvious things. I mean, all the carry-ons of staying in hotels, food, all sorts of things. In those days, you got an allowance from Air Canada, which in Sweden was nothing virtually. I mean, it was just because the cost of things in Sweden was just incredible. So we had some of the supporters, laying a bet amongst themselves, and the winner would then go and buy us a steak or something. I mean, it was quite interesting from that point of view. I was unwell. I got a kind of flu thing for a while, and I wasn't terribly well for one of the games in particular. But my abiding recollection is we had a bit of an incident with the Christian Sorum in the last game, and we thought a stone had been fouled. And if the stone had been fouled, then I wouldn't have had to throw my last stone. We would have won, and that would have guaranteed us a semi-final place. And there was a mess of feet and brushes and all. I mean, I don't think anybody knew. But my team were beginning to get a bit worked up about it. And eventually I just said, look, point one, no umpire is going to award us a game. There's no point in going to an umpire. We maybe feel slightly aggrieved that we think we've actually got this game won, but we just have to calm down, and I've got to go up the other end and stick a draw in the forefoot, and we're in the semi-finals of the World Championship. And we pushed, we got that. But in the round robin, we pushed Jimmy Ursel pretty hard, and we pushed him in the semi-final pretty hard. So we were really pleased with ourselves in many ways, but I think it was quite handy I'd had some experience, because I knew that situation, I was going to have to play that shot. Didn't matter if we brought an umpire and we argued for half an hour, I was still going to have to play that shot. So on the one hand, out of our depth, but on the other hand, reasonably streetwise, I like to think. But terrible problems trying to watch other stones. because the corn brooms were definitely going through the frost, and our brushes were just getting clogged with it.
You had a good start, and then you had in the round robin, the game against Sweden looked like it got a little away from you with the home crowd.
It's a game I've done well.
With so 12-1. It doesn't show the line score, but perhaps that's better off that we don't see it. I don't know how that game went then, but what were but were there crowds? Like, was there a real Swedish support, or was it? Yeah, it was.
Yeah, there were good crowds. I think they did the classic thing and the right thing of bringing in school kids and so on. But of course, there was the king came to the opening ceremony and so on. So there was. You ever tried to tell a king to lift the silver broom off the ice because it's melting in quite quickly, which was what we tried to do because he was standing quite near us, giving the brush for his Shellerskaris, I think, was throwing the first stone as Sweden's only world champion. And we could see the silver broom, which had all these spotlights on it, just melting into the ice. But could you lift that up, please? It's just going to make this hole in the ice. That was a bit of a recollection, yes.
This wasn't a home game now, right? So you had the home game and the year before with junior. You're the away team. So did that feel a little different? I mean, you brought enough people along that you still had your supporters. And
no, we didn't have a tremendous support. I mean, a reasonable number, maybe 30 odd, 40 odd came with us. But I think the thing that was interesting was that, and I've spoken to some of the Swedes since who were involved not as curlers, but involved in the opening ceremony and became curlers because they looked at us and went, here's a bunch of young kids. And I think that was interesting. And I think we instilled quite a lot of interest. Tommy Stern from Denmark was there as well. He was young. So I think there was the first kind of time there were 2 or 3 young-ish teams there. And I think that was interesting. And we got some very good support from the Swedes from that point of view. I think they were, crikey, here's a bunch of youngsters. Because there was quite a lot of carry on.
You still had a pretty good beard. I saw the video, though. You still had a pretty good beard, didn't you?
Well, yeah, I told you I was lazy. I didn't shave. I told you.
You were shaven by then.
Yeah.
So what did you take away from that? Like you guys, you made the playoff. Then you're playing Canada in the semifinal. So like, what do you remember about that? Anything about that game, that team? How you're like it was such a. And I remember the setup. It's a pure semifinal. 1 plays 4, 2 plays 3.
Yeah.
Was it well? And again, it doesn't show a line score. Was it a close? Like it looks like a close game, or was it?
No, it was a close game. Yeah. My abiding recollection is I looked at the stats after the semi-final against Jimmy Ursel, and I think I dropped to about 86 with my last stone, which missed. I was trying to play a double and thinking, crikey, if we're playing that well and we're still losing, we've still got a way to go in this game. The other thing I remember was CBC coming to me and thanking me for not making my last stone. Because if I'd made my last stone, they were going to have to buy half an hour more of satellite time or something to show Jimmy Ursel's last stone in the game. There was some carry on about satellite time or something. But no, we equipped ourselves pretty well both times against Ursel. So we're proud of that, I think.
And with that, I think like I emailed you that Art Lobel recalled getting into a bit of and I know this sounds odd for anyone that's, well, even my age, frankly, but that they got into a letter writing exercise with each other and were actually corresponding. Were there some relationships? You've had these 2 years now, you're in these international competitions. Did you make some different relationships and things like that? Like how did that evolve for you?
Oh, yeah. I remember when we won in 83, I phoned up Tommy Stern and said, guess who won the Scottish? And he said, I'll see you in Regina because I just won the Danish. So, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, so you and Tommy got along pretty well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, no, we built a few, but I guess the issue was to some degree, you're thinking, this might be our one and only. Yeah, we're young, but it still might be our one and only. It took me 6 years to get back. And I think that's true, that you build a lot of relationships. Strangely, I met a lovely family from Kuhlman near Regina, who were of Swedish extraction. And of course, they were overjoyed in 1983 when we pitched up, or I pitched up playing. So, and we still correspond with them today. So, yeah, some of the relationships just go on.